Welcome back, students. This is video lecture on chapter 16, Metabolism. This is by far one of the shortest chapters in the textbook. Therefore, it assumes that you know most of the foundational material. There are just 3 sections. The first is digestion of the common classes of nutrients, then the regulation of energy in the body, and then finally regulation of body temperature. The movement of materials into the body and around the body can be classified into 2 general conditions. The first is the absorptive condition, whereby food molecules are present in the digestive system and they may then be entering the blood vessels or the lymphatic system. With these concentrations of nutrients, the overall goal is storage. And that's what we see going on here on slide 16.1. So beginning down here, we have the 3 classes of nutrients coming across after they have been digested. So glucose, galactose, and fructose enter the circulation and are transported to various locations. Glucose, being the preferred molecule of immediate energy, is required by all systems. So it is delivered to not just the liver, but everywhere else. And extra glucose ends up going to adipose-tissue to be converted into fat triglycerides. Amino acids, likewise, once absorbed, are delivered to 2 general locations. One are all the tissues of the body, where those amino acids are converted through translation into proteins. And they're also delivered to the liver, where the nitrogen component is pulled off and made into urea. And the backbone is sent into these biochemical pathways, which eventually end up turning into fat molecules. The triglycerides take a different journey, but eventually they end up being converted either into fat molecules or monoglycerides. The general role that adipose tissue and the organ known as the liver play in this is paramount. Most lipid molecules are not freely soluble in aqueous solutions, and the plasma and extracellular fluid happen to be aqueous solutions. So how are these substances transported? Well, there are 4 major types of lipid protein complexes. So that's the answer. So the lipid component is centralized and then covered with a shell of proteins. And these are therefore known as lipoproteins. They come in various sizes depending on the ratio of proteins to lipid. So very low density lipoproteins have a very large lipid component compared to the protein component. Low density lipoproteins have a slightly higher protein component, and high density lipoproteins have the most protein to lipid ratio. But the granddaddy of them all is the chylomicron, which will be much bigger than this slide, and that would have a huge number of lipid molecules for every protein that it has. One thing we're realizing is that continued research on the benefits or detrimental nature of cholesterol begins to seesaw year on year. So right now, cholesterol is said to be not that bad. It's genetically controlled rather than controlled by the diet. There appears to be a beautiful interplay between the amount of cholesterol that's present in the diet and how much is in the circulation, in the plasma. And the 2 systems play off each other. So if there's not enough cholesterol coming in through the diet, then that's supplemented by synthesis of cholesterol by the liver. If there's too much cholesterol coming in from the diet, then it's excreted in the feces. So the genetics will control the plasma levels of cholesterol. Cholesterol has 2 faces. On the one hand, it's bad. It can lead to the buildup of plaque on the inside of our blood vessels. On the second hand, the cholesterol is necessary for making the membranes of all cells. If one looks carefully, you'll see there's a loop right here. And that loop is responsible for regulating the total amount of cholesterol in the plasma. So if plasma cholesterol concentration increases, more is secreted through the bile into the digestive system and then eliminated. If there's not enough cholesterol in the plasma, then it can either be absorbed through the ingestion process or by manufacture process from the liver. Table 16.1 provides a summary of the absorptive state of nutrition. So here there's excess in the digestive system, and that is then stored or converted to other substances around the body. Between meals and during sleep and into the morning, we have something known as the post-absorptive state. Here, things happen in a sort of reverse direction. There's not material coming in from the digestive system, so redistribution is the key. Proteins are mobilized by all tissues and fed into the circulation as amino acids. Muscle glycogen may be converted to lactate and pyruvate through muscular activity, and that then has to be converted to less toxic material by being transported to the liver. It can be reconstituted into glucose, and that glucose then can be supplementing the glucose levels in the blood. As time passes, triglycerides mobilize themselves by being converted into glycerol and fatty acids. The fatty acids are then utilized for energy, and the glycerol is taken to the liver to be then combined with lactate and other substances like keto acids to form glucose. Why go to such extremes? The answer is that your brain, which is part of your nervous tissue, has huge demands for glucose in order to stay conscious. And that is priority number one. Table 16.2 nicely summarizes the post-absorptive state of the bodily nutrition levels. The words that are color-coded are designed to draw your attention to very similarly worded but completely different biochemical maneuvers. Thus, gluconeogenesis is the generation or the formation of new glucose through the conversion of other biochemical commodities. Likewise, lipolysis means the breakdown of lipids. Paying attention to the direction of the arrows shows you that in the absorptive state, things happen for storage, and the post-absorptive state relies on liberation of those stores. In order to survive, all cells of the body continue to respire, and therefore they need a supply of energy. And that energy in one state comes in the form of sugar. But when those sugar reserves are depleted, alternative molecules fill in and supply that energy. The role of the liver cannot be overstated, regardless of which of the two states the body happens to be in. One of the most important hormones one is aware of is known as insulin, whose concentration is homeostatically regulated. An elevation of plasma insulin levels results in the absorption of glucose out of the blood into the cells, particularly muscle cells, adipocytes, and the liver, where various things go on depending on the biology of that particular cell type. Contrast that with a drop in plasma insulin levels, which results in a reduction or the reversal of many of these biochemical maneuvers by the same types of cells. At the molecular level, we now understand exactly how insulin exerts its influence. Insulin, being a peptide hormone, binds to a receptor on the surface of the cell, and through signal transduction results in an upregulation of glut proteins. And glut proteins are glucose transporters. So they increase the rate of transport of glucose into cells. When levels of insulin fall, the reverse process takes place and glut receptors are removed from the plasma membrane, therefore reducing the entry of glucose into cells. Application of the knowledge from the previous slide to the three types of tissue that we've been looking at encodes the following biochemical changes, which we can now explain. In muscle cells, insulin results in the importation of glucose, and that glucose can either be converted to glycogen for later utilization or immediate utilization for driving the momentum of muscle cells, the mechanical components. And the amino acids are also imported at the same time, and they can lead to the generation of more myofibrils. In adipocytes, The glucose is converted to triglycerides, which are then stored for later usage. And in the liver, that same glucose becomes either glycogen or gets converted to fatty acids. Insulin production is the role of beta cells, which are part of the pancreas. So they somehow detect an increase in the glucose concentration of the plasma. That results in an increased release of insulin. That insulin in turn causes more glucose to be absorbed by these cells from the circulation, and that restores the glucose levels back to normal after a meal. The beta cells of the pancreas are not just under one type of regulation, they're under a multitude of feedback. Most of it is positive feedback, although there's also some negative feedback. So nervous activity, increase in parasympathetic nerve activity, can lead to an increase in the release of insulin. Likewise, the increase in amino acids can also lead to an increase in insulin. The sympathetic nervous system, by way of plasma epinephrine, also has an impact on the beta cells, but that's the opposite of the parasympathetic system, therefore that leads to a decrease. Insulin can only lower blood glucose levels, but if your blood glucose levels drop down too far, then it's the job of another hormone, glucagon, which is also released by the pancreas, but this time the alpha cells. Its job is to raise the glucose levels back to their homeostatic value. In this case, the primary organ responsible for doing that is the liver. Muscle cells tend not to release their glycogen stores. The sympathetic nervous system can also jump in when the hypoglycemic state is reached, and it can activate adipose tissue to increase lipolysis, and at the same time the liver to perform glycogen or lysis. So that's the breakdown of glycogen into glucose, and also to increase gluconeogenesis. That's the generation of new glucose from substances other than glycogen. Indeed, the hormone cortisol also has a role in this equation, and that's listed here in table 16.3. In addition, another hormone known as growth hormone has a regular role to play in the metabolism of the body other than at times of growth. Growth hormone counteracts the effects of insulin, therefore it's sometimes known as the anti-insulin hormone. The four entities that counter the effects of insulin are compared and contrasted in table 16.4. Hypoglycemia can lead to unconsciousness and death. During fasting, hypoglycemia sets in slowly, but can be exaggerated by insulin-producing tumors, drugs that stimulate insulin secretion, or injecting one with too much insulin if you are diabetic, or any of the other types of substances that counter the effects of insulin and glucose. Figure 16.13 shows the relationship between glucose, glucagon, and insulin in somebody who's running a marathon, probably, that lasts about 3 to 4 hours. Let's turn our attention away from biology to physics. So physics, the laws of physics, control biology. Physicists tell us that a simple relationship exists between energy. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. And this energy, as chemists tell us, is carried in the molecular bonds holding the atoms together in molecules of food. Therefore, when you eat food, you're bringing in energy. And that energy can be used to supply two components, either as heat or as available energy to do work. One thing to always remember is that the heat component is always going to be there. Whenever you perform some type of chemical maneuver, you will generate some heat. How much heat? Well, that varies for each reaction, but there's an average, and that average is about 10%. With respect to your body, the total energy expenditure is translated into three components: the heat produced, the work done, and the leftover energy. And the leftover energy is normally stored in some form. A simple form of that equation is called the metabolic rate. The metabolic rate is the rate at which chemical reactions are taking place, those that are building things up and those that are breaking things down. Some of the known factors that can influence your metabolic rate are given here in table 16.5. For instance, age. As we age, our metabolic rate decreases. Another is your fasting BMR. So the basal metabolic rate decreases as you begin to fast. The body understands that you're losing calories, stored energy, therefore it maneuvers itself to make changes in your set values of your homeostasis in order to preserve you as long as possible. Therefore, losing 10 pounds is easy, losing 20 pounds is very difficult, but beyond 20 pounds it's darn right hard. Figure 16.14 gives us some average expenditure in terms of calories for exercise, and these values are given per hour. So sitting in bed is about 100 calories. Walking around on level ground, 200 calories an hour. And then rowing at 20 strokes per minute, there's 830 calories per hour. Remember this, when you have 1 can of soft drink, you're consuming about 220 calories. That's a weightlifter lifting weights for 1 hour. The relationship between exercise and living and energy intake is straightforward. So the energy intake from food is going to be equal to the heat produced plus the work done by the body and the energy stored. So if you rearrange this, then you can measure how much energy you're going to store by simply measuring the energy from food and take away from that the heat produced and the work that you're doing. Leftover will be the energy that you store. And this will then impact whether you are in energy balance and maintain the same weight, lose weight, or gain weight. Other than insulin, other hormones and enzymes can affect your metabolic interactions. Leptin is a hormone that's produced by adipose tissue, and it has the effect of traveling from the fat cells to the hypothalamus, where it alters the metabolic rate by increasing it, whilst at the same time interfering with your appetite and reducing your food intake. Appetite and hunger are not the same thing. An easy association is to look at the alphabet, starting at the top of your head. So appetite refers to the brain. Hunger refers to the stomach. So appetite is a psychological condition, whereas hunger is a physiological condition. Regulation of hunger is very paramount, and there are many factors, both positive and negative, that can influence that, but we don't fully understand this relationship, and more work is being done all the time. But there are some types of stress that would increase hunger, and there's other types of stress that will decrease hunger. For instance, when somebody passes away, people tend not to want to eat for a number of days. My favorite is ghrelin, and that's produced by the lining of the stomach, which releases this hormone into the plasma, and that has a positive effect on hunger. Let's look at total body weight, and that can be broken into 2 categories. One is underweight, and the other is overweight. Overweight itself has 2 parts, being slightly overweight and being obese. And the cutoff is arbitrary, but most scientists agree that it relies on a BMI of about 30. Being overweight in itself seems to increase the unhealthy condition of the human body. And that leads to various diseases like diabetes and atherosclerosis, as well as hypertension. But being obese amplifies this manyfold, and that can lead to many life-threatening conditions. Some common ones that people face at college are anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa. In the former, anorexia, the person begins to lose weight because of a pathological obsession with their own body form. And that can lead to an energy negative balance where the body begins to lose its structure, eventually leading to malfunction of some of the vital organs. On the other hand, bulimics are people that yo-yo. During periods of guilt, they eat normally at the table, but soon after they go to the bathroom and regurgitate the food and then return back to the table. So it's hard to tell them from those people that are anorexic, who are easy to identify. If weight is a problem for you, the National Research Council, the NRC, has put out some recommendations which are summarized here. So if you follow these recommendations, that you may end up having a healthier physiology. The solution appears to be not abrupt changes or abrupt promises to yourself, because that leads to the yo-yo effect. Instead, what is recommended is a gentle immersion in a change of lifestyle, where you do things controllably over a period of time. Our physiology undergoes many cyclical changes over the course of hours, days, and even longer periods. One of those is body temperature, core body temperature. Figure 16-17 shows the circadian changes in core body temperature over a 24-hour period. And we can see here that during the night, our body temperature drops about 1 degree Celsius. Once again, the principles of physics take over when it comes to the energy transfer via heat. So our bodies can radiate heat, they can conduct heat, they can lose heat through evaporation or convection. Regardless, our bodies are equipped with a multitude of mechanisms to regulate our core body temperature. And the hypothalamus has a major role in regulating that behavior. One purposeful change in our body temperature is known as fever. During fever, we purposefully raise our temperature to outwit any pathogens which like to grow at body temperature. So by raising our temperature, we continue to survive, but the pathogens are slowed down in their reproductive cycles, allowing our immune systems to mount an effective response in most cases. Other changes in body temperature can be induced by exercise, and this table here shows how those changes can be recorded over time. So the exercise period starts at the dark area of this graphic, and we can see that soon after heat production rises rapidly. Those changes are detected and the body mounts a reflex which allows more heat to be lost. Thank you so much.